So the Microphones, pretty much a musical project, eventually turned into a band that started out back in the mid-90s by Phil Elverum, the person who mainly fronts the Microphones, serving as a songwriter and producer for every album in the band's discography. They're also one of the most essential and popular indie folk acts out there, with several acclaimed projects under its name, with the most popular one being The Glow Part 2, the album that we'll be talking about today. Now, before we dive into this album, I think it's important to acknowledge the Microphones' discography. The reason is actually more than just scoring down their history. So, Phil Elverum throughout the late 90s will sign on to K Records, releasing a debut album in 1999 where he was able to gain a small fan base along the way. Then the year after the Microphones release, It Was Hot We Stayed in the Water, an album that I'll come back to later on for reasons that I'll explain. Then in 2001 they released The Glow Part 2, and then even after The Glow Part 2 they released Mount Eerie 2 years after in 2003 before disbanding. Before Phil brought the project back a little bit over a decade later for Microphones in 2020. And even outside of the Microphones, Phil was working on another project under the name of Mount Eerie after the Microphones was disbanded. That project is mostly known for the 2017 album A Crowd Looked at Me, which I might cover in the future at some point, but for now let's talk about the album that made the Microphones a household name around indie circles, The Glow Part 2. So going back to the album It Was Hot We Stayed in the Water, there was a song called The Glow. The song is in a way a song about finding love, or at the very least that special one, describing the glow as the magical, nothing quite like a thing from the person that sets him apart from everyone else. And the song is structured into different parts, with one really pretty female vocal section in the middle that's pretty beautiful, honestly.
Hey, wake up, it's me, that glow. Wake up and listen close.
But that's not the only connection that this album has with The Glow Part 2. This album is in a way the first in a trilogy of albums that, according to Phil, were deemed on nature. This album represents water, The Glow Part 2 represents fire and air, and Mount Eerie represents rocks. Now, The Glow Part 2, both the song and the album are kind of a sequel to the song and, yeah, the album. But the difference here is that it's taking a much more depressive angle. In fact, a lot of the emotions here that are based on depression and anger, in contrary to The Glow, that are expressed in such a raw and cathartic way, it will be hard not to get overwhelmed by it. The album also uses more vague imagery and, in general, metaphors on the lyrics to describe the themes across it, with the main theme being Phil's breakup. And not only are the lyrics, themes, and general emotion of The Glow Part 2 darker and more depressive, the sound of the album is definitely as well. According to Phil, the album takes inspiration from black metal, ambient, and avant-garde genres, and you can feel it on the album. A lot of the album is calm and relaxed, but you can often come across a section where the album experiments with harsher and more abrasive styles. I Want Wind to Blow, the album's opener that talks about Phil's desire of his life wanting to change for the better, symbolized by the grey and somber looking place he's living in, is mostly acoustic with piano, but later on you get some abrasive drums accompanying that main melody 4 minutes in. That's a great part, but my favorite part of the song has always been when the main melody of the song switches to G major, and some other instruments come along as well. Like, it really does radiate a certain warmness to the track. Yeah, Want Wind to Blow is definitely one of my favorites. The title track, a very emotionally driven song that easily hints about Phil attempting suicide after his breakup, begins with those overwhelming grand drums, and most of the track has kind of a droney atmosphere on the instrumentation. Another highlight for sure, especially during the second verse, which is one of the most chilling moments of the album. It's quite unforgettable. The Moon, another emotionally driven track that talks about Phil revisiting the place where he used to spend time with the person of his relationship, but eventually starting to feel regret, Begins with a folky passage, but then out of nowhere it explodes into a lo-fi, shoegaze-ish song for the rest of it. And yeah, this is also another highlight. Yeah, the first 3 songs of the album are honestly one of the best 3-track runs of probably of all time. Like, it's insane. But of course, the first 3 songs are not the only ones that experiment with some harsher and out there directions. Map has very hazy and hard to define textures throughout it. Most of the last song is dedicated to a slow, ambient, almost silent passage. By the way, if you actually listen to the band's albums chronologically, the last song in a way transitions into the next album perfectly, considering Mount Eerie begins with the same nearly quiet passage. And then you have Samurai Sword, which is, well, that one you will have to listen to it by yourself to truly grasp it. But yeah, in general, The Glow Part 2 is an album that combines indie folk with a lot of other genres that tend to lean into a more experimental route, and it works really well for the album mainly because of the nature of it. In a way, it encapsulates the unpredictable and boundless essence of nature. Most albums that will try to go for a nature sounding tone will usually aim for something a lot more low-key and relaxed. The Glow Part 2 has a lot of moments like those, but it's also an album that constantly surprises you. And going back to the themes, one thing that I was able to get from this album is that, well, nature around you isn't always going to be nice to you, and so much of the album encapsulates that with exploring themes like isolation and depression with a very human-like feature to it. Dimension is a perfect example of this, a song that portrays Phil's isolation of the world as if it were an abandoned mansion, both in the descriptions that Phil gives on the verses, but also because the song instrumentally wise is very somber and mysterious. And within the depression expressed throughout the album, there's also a few bursts of anger as well throughout, the most accurate one being again Samurai Sword, where Phil's anger with his relationship is mostly expressed by this intense blast of noise. Even when it comes to the smallest details, the album can also be very memorable. For most of the tracks, you're bound to come across this haunting 5-second drone that you will see pop up again several times afterwards. It's a subtle beat that always comes either at the start of the song or at the end of the song. The last track, for the 10 minutes of near silent ambience, the song uses this drone several times throughout. Heck, even going back to Mount Eerie, you will see this little haunting drone come back again for the first few minutes of the album. It's definitely a small but intriguing bit. And yeah, for a lot of what the album is going for, this album is one of those that is not only sprawling in songwriting, vocals, even with a lot of the production choices, but it's a rewarding experience for both your first listen and to re-listen to. There's a lot of the album you can unfold from, a new thing that makes the experience more unique with each listen. It's both very creative, but also very human-like. Fusing indie folk and other completely different genres as one piece where everything about it feels like it's part of its own world. That's kind of the magic of the microphones, its sprawling exploration of the themes and sounds of its own interpretation of nature is something that I always found admirable, even if at first it's something you might find hard to grasp on. So the question arises, should this be the first Microphones album for anyone unfamiliar with the group? Maybe. Even if it's kind of connected to both the album before and after, it not only still stands well on its own in my opinion, but it pretty much is an album that defines and represents the Microphones. The Microphones is a really great project, and this album and many other projects are definitely worthy of listening to.